let me restart. When we are making these two forms, we look at the form between the new and the edit, we notice that there are three changes between the two. The URI the form is going to send the information to, the method the form is going to say, the method that the form is going to use to send to that URI, and finally, whatever text that is in that button, right? It was like create artist and update artist, I think, were the examples. So we're here in our underscore form.html.rb that lives in the views artist folder because we are going to be using this in the context of artists. And let's start. So what we're going to do is that we're going to start with some ERB tags, form tag, and now the next part is going to be the URI, right? Because that's a syntax that form tag takes. It's going to be URI/method, but we want to generalize what URI we're setting to. So we're just going to use not parth, path. It's going to be a local variable path. And then we have to do the same thing for the method. Method do. I'm going to put a couple of extra empty lines here because the Zoom interface is kind of blocking. I want to see all my code. Right, and then the rest of the form right now is the label tag name, text field tag name, submit tag. And here's another thing that we need to generalize between the two forms. So we're going to use a local variable button text. And let's close the form up like that. Tony, you have a question?
I just had yeah, while we're here, could you just tell me when on a text field tag, when I see F dot or T dot, is that
That's a
just
different
a naming?
syntax. That's a different
Okay,
syntax for something different.
got it. Okay, understood. Thanks.
Cool. So any questions about this partial I made? Like this is the generalized version of the form that we're using. Make sure no questions about the syntax. So like again, this is a generalized form. And what we're doing here is that instead of specifying the URI the form is going to go to, what method the form is going to, the text is button, we are going to use local variables to set that up. Cool. So that works. I'm going to save it. And now I'm going to go to my views, and I guess we'll start with the new artist new. And I'm just going to, give myself a little room here. And now, because we've created this in our form, we're going to take this out. And what we're going to do is we're going to use render in order to get our form working. So let us do open ERB tag and do render, and we got to tell it it's a partial. We're rendering the partial. The name is going to be form. And what else do you think that we have to send to this partial in order to work?
Path.
Brian?
The variables that you're using in the partial?
Exactly. So we set up these variables for the path, the method, and the button text. So we actually need to tell them like, hey, I want you to do these things. So this render method takes a couple of arguments. The first is like, hey, we want you to render the partial, and you're going to look for the form partial. So when it sees form here, it's going to like, okay, I'm going to look for underscore form somewhere in this directory. And now it's going to take another one, locals, and the local is going to be another hash. So it takes another hash, path, artists, method, post, button. Oops, I missed a. There we go. Button, text, create artist. Okay, I'm just going to check my quotes to make sure, and my curly braces and all my things to make sure I haven't not got anything like extra. But that looks good to me. What I can do is that I can kind of Oops. Pull this down so it's a little easier to read. And that is how we send the local variables to the form to be used. Any question though, Ryan?
Can we send other variables? Can we
send
make
whatever.
other changes?
You can do whatever you want.
Cool.
If you need more variable names, you send more variables. Like it is whatever you need to do.
Gotcha. Cool.
Cool. So, Mike?
Can you make your fields dynamic as well? Because that works fine if you need the same fields, but what if you need, to make an artist, you need this, but to make an album, you need an extra.
Yeah, you can do
fields.
like let me go back to my partial here. Like this path, it doesn't have to be path. I could just call this pizza so long as I call this pizza. Right? Like these local variables, I could add more local variables if I wanted to. It does not matter. I can add more local variables. I can take away local variables. Like the idea here is that this works the same way like when we're refactoring in Ruby. Like if we need to make our whatever method we refactored out needs more variables, needs more information, we just got to make sure we're sending it in. We got to make sure that whatever we have here in our partial is going to be fulfilled by whatever we're passing through as locals here. Does that answer?
So can you make another thing where you add, instead of just a name, then you also have last name?
Yeah,
and then
you
you
do that.
pass that?
Yes, you do all those things.
But does that have to be built into the partial?
Well, whatever you're sending through here in the render has to be like generally you should be using it here. It's kind of like if you have a method that you're sending arguments to, like you should probably use it on the other side. So like if I wanted, let's say I had a last name something I wanted to display in that partial, I could just throw an extra like that. Oops.
But then where does that go? Because we don't have a variable called last name in our partial.
No, we'd make one on the other side, like however we're going to use that.
So each form needs its own partial. I guess my question is if you are making one form for a new artist and you're making one form for a new album and they have totally
you'd
different
have to make
fields, then you
you'd
need
have
a
to
different
make
partial for you.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Tony, then Brian.
So just to sort of build on Mike's question, so if we need presentation logic, do these partials replace, like can they replace logic in the view, or do they augment it?
This is still a view, right? We just kind of like cut it up and put it, we're reusing parts of our view. Like the same rules still apply, that you don't want like too much logic in your partial instead, right? Because we're still writing an ERB. We still have like HTML in here. Like this is just we're just treating a view much the same way we write code, in that we're kind of like dry things up.
So if that form had logic attached to it, like, if create, show
it would still
partials,
be here.
if it would live in the partial, not in the main view.
In general, yes. Like not knowing any like specifics, or like if it's an edge case or like a strange situation, but in general, yeah. Like it's just a chunk of ERB or HTML that you've pulled out somewhere else.
Got it. Thank you.
Brian?
Is there a way in your partial to have a default value for some of those variables? Kind of like how we have default values for method variable arguments that you pass into methods in Ruby.
Let's parking lot that one. I think there is, but I could be wrong. I've never actually had to use it because like I just because I don't see like a situation where you would need a default variable, right? Like usually whenever you're doing a thing, it would pass in whatever, whatever you need it to be. Like like this here, I'm in my new view, like I'm not going to have this default variable. Something else is always going to be like a specific value that I want passed through to the partial. So I don't think that it may be possible, but I don't think there's much of a use case for having some sort of default variable. Like if it was a default of some sort, I would probably handle that in a different way.
Yeah, I was just thinking like if you were reusing this form and the method was, 99 times out of 100 post, but then like the 1 or 5 times that you needed it to be a different method, you could just override. But yeah.
Yeah. I think that like, I don't think it really gained much by like taking that out, because like when you're in the view, someone's going to take a look at it. I'm like, yeah, post, I got it. Like it's more communicative just to have it explicit. And I think that when you're doing something as relatively straightforward as this, like having 3 variables pass in is not that big a deal.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this up. I'm just trying to find the browser. Can you see my browser? Where the heck did my browser go? Let me just. Cool. Do you see my browser? Yeah. All artists, new artists, we can see that the form works. And let's create an artist. Who shall we create the artist for? Prince. You can see we created Prince. Excellent. Let's go back to the artist index. Yeah. Oh, I guess we already had a Prince there. Cool. So let us go back to iTerm. Can you see my terminal? Okay. Yes. Oh, now terminal. Yeah. Oops. We're going to go ahead and do the same thing for our edit. Got all the stuff here. We take that out, and we are going to do something very similar. Where it's going to be, give myself a little bit of room. Render partial form, locals, path, artists, oops, these are double quotes, slash artists, slash artist ID, because we're trying to edit this thing. Method is going to be patch, oops, button text, update artist. Okay, because so the path is going to be /artist/artist_id because it's going to be editing, updating an artist. We're going to patch because that's the verb. We're not posting as we're creating, and as we update the button text is going to be update artist. Questions about this? I guess the point now is that we start our Rails server. Cool. Can you see my browser window? All right. Go to artist 1. Let's edit Talking Heads to Taylor Swift. You can see my autofill knows about Taylor Swift. Uh-oh. No route match patch artist 1. That's not good. So let's take a look. Okay, see my terminal. Yes. Why is it? Oh, because there's a put, not a patch here. That's fine. We change it. Start up a Rails server again. Cool. Let's go back to our browser window. Let's go back. And we see here that we changed it to Taylor Swift. And if we go back to the index page, we see that we have Taylor Swift and no more Talking Heads. And that's partials. Kevin.
How can you pass in, like the default value, especially on an edit page? Like it's always nice to have that edit filled in so you know what you had before you change it.
Uh-huh.
Is it possible with a partial?
Yes, you just pass in the default value. You just create more local variables and pass them through.
Okay.
Other questions about partials? Steve.
Can you maybe pass in that value? Like, show us what that looks like? Maybe.
Yeah, so what I would do. Dun, dun, dun. Views. I would probably do something like this. And then I would have access to that object inside the partial. Tony.
I'm a little confused. I thought this syntax or this code lived inside the underscore file.
No, this is the view. This is the view. This is the view itself. And
okay.
And
so this is where it's imported to.
No, this is depending on how you look at it. So essentially, like your render partial method works a lot very similar to the yield in your application.html.arb. It's like, hey, go get whatever's in this partial and bring it back. Much like in your yield in your application.html.arb, it's like, hey, go get the view and just fill it. It goes in here. So let me pull up the.
So this is the view, and these are the values that you're sending to the partial, and then the partial is gonna send back what it should look like, or make it whatever.
Yeah, it's essentially like a It's like a macro kind of. Like,
Got it. Thank you.
like when we think about it, like this is very like the parallel we want you to draw is like this is very similar to how we refactor methods out of classes or refactor like bunches of code out of like out of your methods in the code you write. And this is the partial here. Meg?
Hi. I also want to know, kind of swinging back to Steve, your question of like how would you pass in that extra variable? I think it was Steve, right? For like a placeholder or like walking through it. Someone asked about it, but Mike, can you go back to that where you actually rendered the partial? I think it was on your edit.
Yep.
So if you were to put in that like artist : @artist and pass that over in this rendered partial, if you were to use artist, Mike, can you go ahead and put that back in just so you can see that? So like, yeah, artist is @artist. And then let's say in your partial, you actually went ahead and you put those placeholders in. So in the actual partial for the form, if we put that as a placeholder, so like after text field tag, put a comma after :name and say like artist dot name. So that would be like the placeholder. The issue with this right now is once this form gets rendered, and I think it would be just artist, not the @.
Oh, yeah.
It's a local variable.
Yeah.
But once this form gets rendered for the new, it's going to be like no method name on nil class artist, because this artist wasn't passed over with the new. So something to note is if you have to pass a local variable for one partial to get rendered, you'll still have to pass that local variable in the other, and like wherever else you render that partial, but you'll have to say like artist is nil from somewhere else. And so I think like then you can at least kind of filter out, like put this placeholder in if artist is present, or if artist, or like leave it out if artist is nil. But it will still be looking for like those local variables to be passed in. So you might notice like that you'll still have to pass local variables, even if you don't actually need them when that form gets rendered.
I also want to add that like we are also going to show you different syntax for forms a little later on that does kind of change things on how we handle and how you use them with partials.
Yeah. I think like a lot of y'all or like people in the past have come up with like, what if I want to have a placeholder for my edit, but I don't want a placeholder for my new, obviously. You would still have to pass in that variable, but it would just be nil.
So cool. Tyler, then Mike?
I think that's kind of the case that like Brian was talking about, just having a default value for this local variable. Would that work? Would we be able to do that?
Yes. I think when you talk about like default, there might be a way that you can have a default, not like, I don't know of one. So what I've seen and what I do is I, like, if I don't need a variable, then I just say, I like still define it, but I say that it's nil. And you can do that with any local variable. But I don't know a way that like it would be I don't know, look into that syntax. I think we did parking lot that. I think there might be a way, but I don't know.
Yeah, I see it, and I see like there's a gross way to do it that someone's telling people to. There's a Stack Overflow answer, and I'll post that a little bit that talks about it, and it's like I don't like that. It just seems like it's just it's gross. But I'll post it so you can take a look at that. Mike?
I would assume that you can also have multiple partials. So like this one is for a form, but on all the artist pages, if you wanted just to have like a scrolling thing of like top hits, top albums, you can also just drop a new partial and put it on each page.
Yep. You can have all the partials.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay,
like,
cool.
That's totally, and like I think that we see a lot of that happening. Like, let's do this.
The thing that I think of with that is like the ads that pop up in the middle of your page, and it would just be like a standardized little piece of
Yes,
HTML
that's a
code
little
stuff that
that's a
sort of pops
little
up.
different. But let me share with you my screen, and we can kind of talk about this. I can give you kind of this example. Oh no, there we go. So you go to Amazon and you search for cookies, as I do on a fairly regular basis. We can think of like each one like of these, like this kind of like card, as we'd call it, as a single partial, right? And this is an example of how you could use a partial in, say, a index in an index view, where you are iterating, where you put your render partial inside that iterative loop. Do you see what I mean by using partials in this case? God, I want cookies now. Ryan.
Going back to your example in the text editor.
Yeah, give me a second to get back there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Could you just put like on the right hand side over here on the actual view that you're trying to do, could you do artist underscore name there and then just pass in artist name so that you don't have to
underscore dot?
It's going to be at artist dot name, but you're going to do artist underscore name to be specific on the other side of what you're trying to do, and then pass in artist underscore name on the actual partial.
I see.
As well.
I think that does work,
because then you don't have to pass
so
the
like
to the new. You can just put nil in there instead, so you don't have to act upon an object.
Yeah, I think that definitely will work, Ryan. I think the thing you have with that is you're just like, now you just have a ton of variables. Like, let's say this was a giant form, you're passing like a ton of variables, which is fine. So it's kind of like give and take one or the other, but I think that's a fine way to do it as well.
Yeah. Okay.
I think my initial instinct is I'd rather send the object through and just like send in a blank object like every single time after that. Because like I don't think that you really want to like just I think that you can suffer from a lot of bloat and a lot of like potential for just like misspelling something, doing something wrong.
Sure. Okay.
Cool. So that's about it for partials. Let's take a 10-minute break. Let's come back at 10:07 and we will talk about APIs.